Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Mike Berger again with NC Planning, coming to you today with another Daily Counsel. We had done some of these Daily Counsel sort of sit-downs, discussions over coffee or water or whatever your preference is, as COVID-19 was approaching, and now in the space as COVID-19 starts to loosen up, leave us hopefully, and a return to normalcy. We're going to have some sit downs and some chats with other professionals in various industries. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Becky Jacobs with Simple Change. And Becky works with companies, organizations, and personnel to make work life better and help to improve and retain top talent. I'm sure she can say it much better than I did. So with that, I'll turn it over to Becky. Becky, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it. This is a great opportunity to have a conversation about what really makes a difference in workplaces.
Of course, of course. Well, with that, I mean, that's always, top of mind right now, especially the pandemic. I think we've seen a lot of pivoting. That's the sort of popular phrase. Here we are on Zoom doing our own version of pivoting. But tell me about how everything is with you and with Simple Change and how you've been able to kind of adjust with the pandemic.
Michael, I think like everyone else, you have those things that were pretty easy and straightforward. I've worked remote and out of my home office for more than 7 years. So that for me was not a big deal. My husband had already started working remote. So we'd gone through all of those adjustments early on. And frankly, I'm an introvert. So not having to go to big meetings and events and conferences didn't bother me that much. I actually enjoy this. It was hard, obviously, on my kids. I have 2 teenagers in high school. One's a senior, one's a sophomore. So helping them adapt to online school has been kind of a little bit of a, roller coaster at times, but I feel like we're getting through it. I try to, because of what we teach in businesses and what I do to support executives as well, try to maintain that balance between physical safety and mental well-being, because the connection with others is absolutely critical. So finding those opportunities to connect and really, strengthen that well-being is important right now. From a business perspective, it's been weird. So here's the kind of story I tell. Pandemic hit, right? March, everything closed down. Pivot wasn't the word. It was just a frantic, close the doors, figure it out. So on the positive side, a lot of the business owners and business leaders who historically were not open to remote working, right? This won't work. People won't be productive. They'll be watching TV all day. They learned really quickly that you can be productive. It is not the same, but that doesn't mean that it can't work. So we had a big rush in kind of March, April, May of helping teams adapt, shift to remote. What are some best practices? How do you deal with stress and anxiety? And then summer came and everyone just kind of said, enough. I don't want to talk. I don't want to think. I don't want to be on calls, turn off all of the fun went away. And it got real. And then school started and it got insane, especially for working parents. October, November, people were trying to, let's muscle through this. And then December hit and it was just, I'm out. No more. I can't do it. So we've really seen waves of adapting and resilience and just the reality that this is different and hard, and people are making it through and getting creative and getting innovative, but that doesn't mean it doesn't come with a huge amount of stress.
Absolutely. As practicing attorney and a manager of our company, as well as a husband and a father of 2, both of whom virtually learn, I fully understand I would just call it for political correctness, a potpourri, I guess. I can think of some other probably not appropriate words, but a potpourri of just experiences throughout the pandemic. That being said, I talk with my wife all the time about I know it's not perfect the way the kids are learning, but I'm really proud of them and how well they've been able to adapt. We still have that conversation about what's it going to be like when they go back to school full time, and are they ready? And I've got a first grader rising to second and a sixth grader rising to seventh. So this was kind of a transitional year, but I think, much like we will experience in, the workplace, they'll have to almost pivot back into what life was kind of like pre-pandemic. With that said, it probably makes for a nice segue of, and I know you don't have a crystal ball. I get this question all the time. I tell folks I don't have a crystal ball, but I have, thoughts and ideas of like where things may go post pandemic in specific industries. But what are you seeing with the companies you deal with the clientele, about thought process in now pivoting back the other way, right? As we relax restrictions, COVID-19 hopefully goes away, or at least herd immunity builds, and we get back to a level of pre-pandemic normalcy, if there is such a thing. What are you seeing as far as employers concerned about bringing their folks back, and how they can balance that kind of work-life environment?
So that's a great question, Michael. I'm seeing a few different trends right now. The first is the physical work environment. We, as a culture, shifted to this open office kind of setting. And, frankly, when you're in the middle of a pandemic, which, by the way, is not going to end miraculously on a certain date, right? 100% of the population won't get vaccinated. There are variants out there. This isn't something that will just magically stop. We're going to have to figure out how to adapt and adjust and find that setting that makes the most sense. And every business is different. So that's part of the thing to kind of wrap our heads around. There's no done, right? There's just varying degrees of different. So a lot of workplaces are trying to figure out, how do I create a physical environment that's safe, especially with things like ventilation, filtering of the air. That's the most important. But in spacing out desks and creating barriers to help those who are comfortable coming back in to feel safe. There's another aspect to that, though. Employees have, especially in office-based cultures, they've identified that they can be productive working from home, and they can have some sense of a work-life balance. They can get in a walk the dog at noon. They can get in a workout, perhaps. They can cut out an hour-ish of commute a day and spend that time doing something they enjoy. So there's this sense of, wait, let's not go back, because if you really think about it, a lot of people weren't terribly happy the way it was before, right? I have to get up really early and get the kids in the massive rush and get them to school. And then you deal with commute. And frankly, workplaces aren't always the most productive environments. You get disrupted as people come up and talk with you, the water cooler chat, going out to lunch. So from a pure productivity standpoint, I feel like there's a blend that will be most effective. Having said that, there are elements of all of those distractions and disruptions that improve our productivity. They create social connection with our coworkers that is organic, as opposed to the forced schedule a meeting kind of virtual connection. They allow us to ask questions and engage in conversations that don't come up when you have to schedule it. They also allow for a break in the day. I think people had this mindset that productivity means you are heads down, engaged in what you're doing for 8 to 10 hours a day. That's not how our brains work. That's not how our bodies work. We can't physically achieve that level of performance for sustained periods of time. Even the highest performers, as they were, analyzed and studied, can maintain that focus for about 90 minutes. And then they have to take a break, or their brains are going to take a break anyway, right? You notice those moments of, oh, I'm getting distracted all of a sudden, and I just need to, maybe I need coffee, maybe I need to go to the bathroom. That's your brain telling you, stop already, right? Take a breath, walk away. So all those disruptions during the day were beneficial to our mental well-being. And that commute at the end of the day, as much as we would, love to skip the I-40 commute, that commute gave us a very specific separation, an ending of the workday. And that's what most people are missing now as they're working remote. It just blends right into your evening, and you don't have that moment to transition. But I think we're going to see a blend.
Yeah, I agree more, and I hear what you're saying, and I then think of myself and how I've personally adapted and working from home environment. I'm fortunate in what I do as sort of outside general counsel for companies, that I have a fair amount of communication, albeit a lot of it is email, and most of it is phone calls.
Yeah.
Though a fair amount has shifted now to the one-on-one Zoom. But I think you're exactly right that those communications, while are beneficial, there is something that I have felt has been missing in that sort of person to person, be it the water cooler talk or whatnot. And the other thing I heard you say that I really identify with is that there's no rigid start stop to the workday. I joke a lot that anymore I just go where my calendar tells me, because sometimes it's a pause and it's, well, is this Tuesday or is this Wednesday? And you check the calendar, right? But to your point, without the from point A to point B and then point B to point C, commute in, commute out, there is no real sort of downtime, if you will. It's just a cadence of back to back to back to back. And a lot of times it's like you get to 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening and I'm not sure that I really, took a real break at all. We just kind of kept on. Productivity is great, but your point about needing to have that balance to make sure you're kind of optimally productive, if that's a term, I think that's really, really a good point.
There's another element too that I'd like to bring up as it relates to going back into the office. The mask wearing, right? The safety piece is divisive. It just is what it is. I'm not here to judge, one side or the other, but as a leader, as a business owner, understanding that the tone you set is going to impact your employees. If the tone is, I've been vaccinated, I'm fine, we're taking precautions, it's not a big deal, it is very difficult for your employees to mask up and feel like they can ask for those safety precautions, because you're setting a tone of that isn't necessary here. So that psychological safety of self-advocating for what you need, I feel is going to become a huge issue when we open offices back up. There's going to be levels of mask shaming, right? Oh, you're one of those people who has to wear a mask, or you're one of those people who doesn't care. It's going to be very divisive. And frankly, business leaders really need to be equipped with the understanding their own bias and their own tendencies and how that impacts their team and the tone they're setting. Because that's the issue I'm most concerned about, is creating that psychological safety for people to speak up about their own self-advocacy and what they need, and to create a space where everyone is welcomed. We talk a lot about inclusion and diversity. This is one of those very visible differentiators that is going to cause difficulty when you set the tone that everybody has to come back, or don't worry about masks, it's not a big deal in this space. That's a very real fear and issue. And I feel like from a legal perspective, that's going to become an interesting and hot topic for you.
Yeah, I think it's been a question already, right? Because there are some industries that are either, mostly back to work. I don't know if I can say fully, but mostly back to work, and have been for a while. And those are two questions that we get from time to time in that sort of like employment HR law space, is about mask wearing, number one, and then number two, it's become a real hot topic, is about, can I require my folks to get a vaccine? And the guidance, not dissimilar from how we saw things roll out from like an economic standpoint with SBA and CARES Act and PPP loans, and just sort of updates day by day. That is happening now with the uh, more availability of the COVID vaccine, and the question of, well, can I just mandate it that folks can get it? And it's a fine line. And most of what I've seen as far as the guidance is try to get the buy-in from the employees, as opposed to issuing it as a mandate, if possible. And it seems to me like that's a really good recipe for success if you can get it done. Um, One last question before we go, just because this is something that I face a lot, and I know it's part of simple change. And my perspective, again, from corporate counsel, oftentimes we are looking at restrictive covenants and employment agreements. And a question from a company or an employer that says, "Hey, one of my folks left, and now they're trying to get somebody else to go with them or whatnot. Is that a breach? And then what's the value there?" And that sort of goes into this vein of retention of top talent. If you want to retain your folks, looking at the cost of employee turnover, it's one of those things that there are metrics out there, and I've looked at them. My team's looked at them. We've counseled and we've guided clients in that space. But I know one thing's for certain: it's expensive. It is expensive to lose team members. Turnover is costly, and so oftentimes it's best to create a culture, I think, to try to retain that top talent. What can you share with us in that space? Because I know that's one of your focal points.
It is. So first of all, I'll point out that it's also expensive to keep the wrong person in the wrong role, or someone who isn't a fit, someone who has behaviors that are, that are divisive, that aren't inclusive, that are frankly toxic. So is turnover expensive? Absolutely. And so is keeping the wrong person on your team. So I'll caveat with that.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So let's talk about turnover for a minute. We obviously know there are costs associated with, with recruiting and posting the job. There's the time cost of, let's figure out the job description, who's going to do the interviews. Start thinking about your salary cost, right? All of the other things that are being either set aside or added to someone's plate, which is often the case, in order to make the time and space to go through the process. Then you onboard them. Most people aren't at full capacity for at least 3 to 6 months, depending on the role. So you've got a drop in productivity as compared to the salary that you're outlaying. The cost that's often hidden is the impact to the person left behind, because that work often doesn't just disappear. Somebody has to do it. So it's the burden that's carried by your talented team when you've already had that individual leave, and now somebody has to carry the load, and that load gets really heavy and creates risks that they will in turn decide like that's enough, right? So those are some of the costs associated that people often forget about when they're thinking, well, we're just gonna, like, no big deal, we'll just hire another person. You also lose all of that intellectual property. You lose the knowledge of how things work. You lose the connections with your clients, right? If they were keeping in mind, not the toxic person that you want to leave, but if you've got a strong performer on the team, their relationships, the trust they've built with your clients, with your team, the ease of communicating and getting things done, all of that is disrupted when you have turnover. So I would say that it's important for business leaders to create an environment where people feel they can perform, right? I can be my best possible self here. I'm included in what's happening. I feel a sense of belonging and purpose. I feel recognized and appreciated, which doesn't mean you have to throw money and gift cards at people. It's amazing how much a very simple, you know what, Michael, I really appreciate the way you handled that call. That made such a huge difference. You know, I appreciate what you've done to help us retain that client. Those types of things go a long way in retaining talent, but also being willing to look at your own behaviors as a leader and what might you be doing that makes it difficult for people to feel like they have a place there. So those are some elements of turnover and of creating that culture. We want to retain that top talent. We want them to feel valued and respected. And that also means that especially in times of COVID, we may need to get creative and think differently about that traditional 40-hour work week that was created in the times of Henry Ford trying to build Model T cars,
Right.
right? Especially for working parents, I would much rather have someone working 15 to 20 hours a week, staying plugged in, staying connected, keeping those relationships and those client connections, than have them walk out the door because I couldn't do anything other than 40 hours. So I would encourage leaders, think more broadly about what you need and how to keep that talent engaged, because it may mean you need to be flexible and come up with some different solutions with them, not for them, in order to create that culture that allows you to keep them engaged.
Great points, Becky. Really good stuff to think about. Keep in mind, I think in any case, but certainly now as we hopefully start to ease back in to normalcy post pandemic, or lightning of the pandemic, whatever phraseology comes up.
Yeah.
If it's all right with you, sometimes we get folks that follow up after watching a video like this, how can I get in touch with Becky? And so I like to just do a screen share, if that's okay with you. Simple change of where they can find you. And I think this is
Find.
it.
Yep.
Are you seeing the simple change there? This
I am.
is the contact page. Lots of ways to get in touch. I like the schedule the call button here, as well as an email if you want to talk to Becky or get in touch with Simple Change. Becky, thanks again so much for being with us today. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me the time to just share some tips. And I would encourage leaders. This is a very difficult time, but your team matters. So this is the time to step up.
Couldn't agree more. We're big proponents of the team approach at NC Planning. So right there with you on that. Thanks again for the time. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to share and join with us. If you've liked the video you've seen, please feel free to like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff that the techie folks do. And until next time, we'll see you again. Thanks again, Becky.
Thanks, Michael.